Good evening all and welcome. Tonight for you I have a collection of dating horror stories for you to sink your ears into. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon, but for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Several years ago I found myself in Livingstone in Scotland. I just happened to be there for a few days in a hotel with my sister and brother-in-law. While there, I went on a few dating and hookup sites just to see who was in the area. I didn't intend to actually meet up with anyone whilst there, as I'd put that on my profile. I put it on there that I was only looking to chat and make friends. On the day before we were due to leave, I went into one of the hookup apps, Grindr, and received a message from someone. We got chatting for a while and he was very charming and sweet, a hairdresser from Edinburgh. And while chatting and getting to know each other, I decided to hit the hay. The following morning I received a message from him asking if I wanted to meet up for some fun in the bedroom. I told him I couldn't as we were leaving that day, and it had been stated on my profile that I wasn't meeting anyone while in Scotland. He started becoming abusive, saying that I was a time waster and saying sexual things of what he could have done to me had we met, but that I wouldn't have the chance. Most of it was just insults and swears, so I told him that if he didn't stop, I would report him and block him. He didn't stop, so I reported him and blocked him. Fast forward to the last few years, and the guy I had spoken to was in the news. He had been using the app to lure victims so that he could sleep with them, but tampered with the condoms so that he could purposefully infect them with HIV. I thank the lucky stars that I decided not to meet anyone. His 10 known victims could have easily ended up being 11. We all make dumb decisions in life, but in this case, I was stupid. Very stupid. I arranged to meet a guy off Tinder, but because of my heightened anxiety about driving, I arranged for him to pick me up outside my place. I had been talking to him for a few weeks at least, but that is not redeemable and I know that. The choice I made on this day could have ended me, but thankfully I'm still around to share the tale with all of you. The guy picked me up in his car and told me he planned to take us out for sushi. I love sushi, so I thought great. He put in the name of the restaurant into his GPS and we were off, making pleasant conversation on the way until I started seeing woods. Then I looked out the window. I felt very confused. We're supposed to be going into town, not the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Fear then hit me hard. I swear the GPS has taken me through here. I didn't choose this path. Can we just get back to civilization? My eyes were wide, and I must have looked like a deer in headlights. His face was really apprehensive, so he must have known that I was scared out my mind. Oh my god, I thought to myself. I should have just conquered my anxiety about driving and met him somewhere public, or better yet, not gone with this guy at all. What the hell was I thinking? I'm gonna get murdered here in these woods. I tried checking on my phone to see if I could assist him with the GPS, and that's when he said those spine-chilling words. "Oh, there's no signal out here, love." I remember just thinking to myself to try and look calm. Don't let him suspect you're onto something. But man, did I feel terrified. The tips of my fingers were cold while I was simultaneously sweating. If he was going to kill me, part of me wanted him to get it over and done with so I wouldn't be left in anticipation. His forehead was perspiring. He kept saying, "I swear I'm not doing this. I'm just trying to get us back en route to the sushi place." I don't care about sushi anymore. Get me to a gas station, anywhere with people at this point. I don't have a shovel or weapon in my trunk or anything if that's what you're thinking. Which did little to calm my nerves. We finally reached the restaurant after what felt like an eternity, and I'd never been more scared in my life. I didn't have much of an appetite and I was physically trembling when we arrived, but I reasoned he didn't kill me when he had the chance, so I guess it was safe to continue with our date. I already planned on taking an Uber home because I didn't want to go through that experience again, and was shocked out my mind when he asked, So when do you think we'll be able to do it? I nearly choked on a piece of sashimi. What? I didn't know when this was coming from, and I didn't know how he could ask me something like this now on a first date, when he literally saw me pale as a ghost just moments before. You know, like, how long will it take for you to sleep with me? A day? A week? A month? I stared at him dumbfounded. I couldn't respond because of how utterly speechless I was in that moment. Well, I can't wait a whole month, I'm telling you now, he said. I didn't say anything, and for the rest of the date I was insanely awkward. I said goodbye as I took my Uber home, and only seconds after my driver pulled out the restaurant parking lot, he messaged me to say that he doesn't think it will work out because he needs a girl with a higher libido. I didn't argue, just text back a simple okay, ready to be done with the man. When the Uber driver took me home, he did not take me through the wilderness pathway of a potential murder site. He took me home through streets, other cars, lights, and the sweetest scene to my immense relief. I couldn't help but wonder why my date had taken me an hour drive through the wilderness to get to a restaurant that in Uber only took 15 minutes. The whole thing was chilling. I don't know if my date planned on anything sinister or if it was an honest mistake, but I'm glad I made it out alive. I learned a lot that night. One, that I really should have already known, that I foolishly ignored for some reason. Don't let strangers from dating apps pick you up in their car from your house. So to the guy that took me through the woods, let's never meet again. In our turbulent time together in Kentucky, my ex and I grappled with a strained relationship, marked by her frequent declarations that she could find someone better, and her constant references to exes who seemed ever present in her life. The atmosphere was charged with tension, to say the least, but on one particular day things took a bizarre and frightening turn. As we sat on the couch just watching TV, an unexpected shift occurred when out of nowhere she turned towards me, her face wearing a blank expression that sent chills down my spine. It was in that moment the person beside me felt like a complete stranger, triggering an unsettling wave of fear. Suddenly, she seized me by the throat, her eyes void of recognition, attacking me as though possessed by an inexplicable force. The struggle intensified when she reached for a nearby hammer, her intentions chillingly clear. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to wrestle the hammer from her grasp, prompting an immediate transformation from aggression to retreat. She hid away, leaving me bewildered and questioning my role as the supposed antagonist. Seeking answers, I asked her about the inexplicable episode, only to be met with tearful confusion and the unsettling admission that she had no idea. I was very frightened by the ordeal and found myself waiting for her to fall asleep or hiding in the bathroom for most of the night. It's only when she finally fell asleep that I ventured out and slept on the couch. The next morning, I made the decision to leave. What made the situation even more scary was that she had displayed no signs of mental illness before this nightmarish incident. The trust in our relationship had been shattered, leaving me quite traumatized and haunted by the fear of the unforeseen, lurking beneath the surface. As it turns out, her unsettling behavior didn't end with me. She swiftly relocated to Illinois and did the same thing to another guy. During my freshman and sophomore years of college, I was extremely awkward. I had just come out as gay and didn't have any friends, and I was just generally being a big wad of social anxiety. Given that I didn't even have the social skills to make friends, it's not surprising that I also had literally no dating experience. Miraculously, over the course of the summer after sophomore year, I sort of grew out of the worst of my awkwardness. I lost some weight, had a lot more confidence in myself, and my self-esteem was a lot higher. I came back to school in August, and by October, I had a decent number of genuine friends and had gotten a lot more involved on campus. with my newfound confidence, I decided I'd finally download Grindr and see what it was like. For anyone who doesn't know, Grindr is a dating app that's primarily used for finding sex and hookups for gay people. Despite my recent improvement in the social arena, I was still extremely naive and inexperienced when it came to dating. I set up my Grindr profile with a nice picture of myself and a very brief bio, and I got a lot of messages very quickly after my picture was approved. One guy who messaged me with the display name of Dad4Young, which should have been my first red flag, but I was oblivious. I should note that I look really young for my age. At the time I was 21, but was regularly asked by campus staff in which middle school or high school I was visiting from. I'm 23 now, and still get asked if I want a kids menu if I go to restaurants with my parents. It's that bad. So Dad4Young sends me a message that says, "What's up?" and I reply without looking at his profile first. Then I look at his profile and notice he's 54. His only profile text says, "The younger, the better." And it was a zoomed in picture of a hairy chest. So I was not very interested. But given my inexperience, I thought ignoring him would be terribly rude, so I kept on replying. I don't totally remember what we spoke about, maybe 10 or so messages we exchanged at first, but I do remember him telling me that I was very cute. I told him I was a student, but I never mentioned to which college I went to. It's important to note that I went to college in a major city, and there are a bunch of different colleges all within like 5 miles of each other, and a few more within those 10 miles. So, sort of like Tinder, Grindr works off your location, but much more precisely. If you're less than a mile or two away from someone who's online, it will display the distance in feet. I noticed that Dad4Young's profile said he was 25 miles away, which I thought was kinda far. Dad4Young started getting more sexual in his chats and asked if I wanted to meet up. I felt bad flat out denying him since he'd been so polite, so I told him I didn't want to meet up with him that day, but that we could keep talking if he wanted. I figured that was that, and when I checked 20 minutes later it said he was offline. Nope. About half hour later, I get another message from him. "Hey Wade, I got a wild idea, and thought I'd take a nice drive out to Frobisher College." I had not told him the name of my college, nor had I told him what part of town I was in. I looked at his profile, and it now said he was 3 miles away. I started freaking out a little, and didn't reply to his messages in the hopes he would leave me alone. It's important to note that my college has a couple of different campuses separated by a few miles. I lived on the upperclassmen residential campus, which is about 2 miles from the main campus where all of the other student dorms and main buildings are. I felt like he was going to try and find me. He'd go to the main campus first, then maybe give up, since not many outside people know about the separate residential campus. 5 or 6 minutes later, I get another message saying something like, "No fun if you don't play along. What building are you in?" His profile says he's a little over 2,500 feet away, and every time I reopened his profile, the distance would decrease. I was fully losing my mind at this point, since the guy had the ability to pinpoint my location, so I shut my blinds and turned off my light, locked my window and door to the apartment and bedroom door. My roommate was also out of town on some kind of retreat, so it was just me. He kept sending me messages every minute or so saying things like, "I'm gonna find you, here I come," and other supremely creepy stuff like that. The distance was down to 310 feet, and I was completely losing my mind and didn't know what to do, so I just deleted my whole profile. Nothing else happened that night, though I was absolutely terrified he was going to come knocking at my door. Fast forward to 3 days later, I decided to re-download Grindr, and after doing more research and seeing that I can just adjust the settings so that my exact location isn't visible, when I logged on for the first time with my remade profile, I adjusted some of the search filters until the results were specific enough to display Dad4Young's profile, which I promptly blocked. But later that evening, I got a message from someone with the display name "Will Find You," with the same gross profile picture as Dad 4 Young, and my stomach sank as a flurry of messages came in. "You messed up. Almost got the police called on me because of you. Couldn't find you, so I had to go to some other dorms and find someone else. Said it was outside his dorm and told me to leave and he'd call the cops. I'm coming for that sweet virgin butthole." Freaked out, I blocked him again, deleted my profile and then deleted Grindr, and refused to re-download it or any dating apps for about a year after that, at which point I worked up the courage to try again, and thankfully haven't heard from this nutjob since. So terrifying old man with a fetish for young and experienced guys, please, let's not meet. This happened about 3 years ago now. Back in February, when my boyfriend and I had decided to try out an open relationship for a little while for various reasons. We lived separately in one of the largest cities in northern Middle America, and there's a decent-sized population of college students, like me, to keep the gay community fresh, so I was doing pretty well for myself. One night I was bored and scrolling through Grindr, looking for an easy hookup, when I got a message from a guy that was barely 800 feet away. He wasn't terrible looking, and I was a little desperate, so agreed to go to his place. So, he lives quite literally down the street from me, and I could see his building from my window. I walked over, he let me up into his apartment, and we made small talk, and I mentioned where I lived. Hell, I even pointed out my window from one of the windows in the stairwell. From the first, I thought there was something off about the guy, not necessarily bad, just different. An odd twitch in his hand when he gripped the banister, the vacancy of his eyes when he smiled. But I wasn't exactly surprised that after we got to his apartment, the first thing he did was tell his very pretty and friendly cat to say hello, and the second thing he did was walk over to the kitchen counter, grab a needle and shoot up. I hadn't even closed the door behind me. I stood there staring and he turned around, dropped the needle on the counter and went, "Oh crap, man. Should have asked, you cool with that?" I am not a good Christian boy. I'd broken into a church while tripping on LSD. I had done the nasty on a headstone back in high school, but I have my standards. So I shook my head mutely, pulled my hat back on and opened the door to leave. The guy rushed over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Yo, I'm sorry. You don't gotta go, we don't gotta mess around. You wanna watch Transformers 3 or something?" "Nope," I said bluntly, hustling away to the stairs. I bundled up my scarf against the early February chill and hurried back down the street to my apartment. He followed me downstairs barefoot in pajama pants and a t-shirt until I stepped outside into the whipping winds. I turned back briefly to look after a moment, and he was standing there in the doorway watching me. I didn't have any premonitions of weirdness or doom. I grew up in Missouri, junkies barely register as odd at this point, so I went home and went to bed. Now you may have guessed it, but I'd never seen this dude around the neighborhood before. Truthfully, I hadn't seen most of my neighbors because my neighborhood is an odd mix of white-collar suburbia, college housing, and low-income housing like my paramour's building. All on one street. So it didn't really register when I started seeing him more. I would leave for work in the afternoon, and he'd be on the other avenue across from the building strolling along, or he'd cut across my building's parking lot like all the kids in the neighborhood did. A few times I saw him walking across the campus mall, as my apartment building is directly adjacent to my campus, but he'd always swerve to avoid me. Once or twice, I'd notice him in the grocery shop, where I work as a barista, but it is the only one within walking distance, and he mentioned he didn't have a car. This went on for the entire month of February. Eventually I started noticing. He'd always be walking down the street opposite my building when I left for work at my usual time, and he was only ever at the store when I was working. He'd never approached the coffee stand within the store where I work, but he would look at me. A few times I noticed him enter, look at me, pretend to shop, and leave without buying anything in particular. I was starting to feel creeped out, but he hadn't done anything yet to make me feel particularly unsafe. One day late February, I worked an early shift. When I got off, I was feeling a little crazy from lack of sleep and reached my place about 20 minutes before I usually leave for work. And on the corner of the sidewalk opposite me was the guy. He was checking his watch over and over and looking up. I did a bit of brilliant detective analysis and followed his gaze up to my living room. Then I looked back down at him. He looked right at me. There was a moment of tension and we stared each other in the eyes. Like I said, this dude wasn't giving off any dark or evil vibes. I've met people that do. No, what I saw in his eyes was much more human and scarier. Desperation, loneliness, pain, and anger. He hurried after me. I'm 6'3" and a former sprinter, whereas he's a 5'8" junkie wearing flip-flops on ice. I made it to the first set of doors to my apartment, scanned myself through the second, and locked them behind me. He walked through the unlocked first set and tried opening the second, tried pushing the handicap button to open them and then just gave up. "Look man, I'm sorry," he shouted, laying a hand on the glass on the door. "Can we talk about it?" I shook my head. "Leave me alone." Then I whirled on my feet and stomped over to the elevator, and when I turned back, he had retreated into the snow. I didn't see him for a few weeks after, which was nice because my boyfriend likes to walk down the street past the dude's apartment when he stays over and needs to go and smoke. One night my boyfriend was over at my place. He just got out to smoke before we went to bed and mentioned that he wanted me to come over with him the next time we went out. "Why?" I asked, pulling him in close while he shivered. "It's dark and cold, and I get paranoid out there sometimes," he mumbled into my chest. "There's this creepy dude that sometimes stands on the corner across the way and just stares at the building. One time he asked me for a cig and told him I didn't have one when I literally had one in my hand. He laughed, kissed my chin and passed out, and I lay there awake, troubled. When I was sure my boyfriend was asleep deeply, meaning after about 5 minutes, I extricated myself and went to the window. It was a cold, clear night. I could see across the street, under the orange glow of the streetlight, was the guy. I couldn't make him out clearly, but when he saw me, he waved. I flicked him off and closed the blinds. I didn't feel like I should tell my boyfriend because he was either immediately going to call the police, which I hate doing, or try and defend me. And while I love him with my heart, I didn't want to watch a fight between my junkie stalker and my underweight nicotine-addicted boyfriend, so I kept it to myself and hadn't told him. But I did start accompanying him when he went out to smoke. The guy was usually outside. Sometimes he'd follow us for a bit before ducking away down a side street. Sometimes he'd watch from a distance, and sometimes he'd be up in his apartment. My boyfriend thankfully never noticed, and I kept my composure and nothing happened. One night though, we went out so my boyfriend could smoke like normal. When we reached the end of the street and turned around, the stalker was behind us about 50 feet back. I turned my head to check and there he was. He waved at me again, and something told me I had to get back inside. "Hey, babe, let's get back inside, yeah, I'm cold." "Aw, baby, okay, I'm almost done," he replied. We walked back to the apartment building, and without turning I knew the stalker was behind us the entire time. I kept my hand intertwined with my boyfriend's and kept up the casual conversation we'd been having about how I hate geese. We got back to the apartment, and he got changed for bed while I grabbed some water. So I'd never lived in an apartment before, and I didn't know if it was odd or not, but this building has a wired telephone in each unit that rings when someone wants to be let in. Ours never rang unless it's Uber Eats, so my boyfriend was surprised when it started ringing late at night, when neither of us had ordered anything. "Probably just someone playing a prank," I said, unhooking the phone from the wall and putting it in the kitchen cabinet. He accepted the comment without struggle, and we laid down in bed. After he was soundly asleep, I got up, got dressed, grabbed a few things and headed downstairs in my thick winter coat. Sure enough, Fanboy was out there in the parking lot, and waved at me and jogged over, smiling broadly. "Hey man, what do you want?" "Look man, I just feel like we ended things awkward last time and I wanted to talk to you." "So, you stalk me?" "What?" He started to look angrier, his brows furrowing. "Nah man, I didn't stalk you, I just wanted to know when I could talk to you, but you always avoid me. Now you're walking around here with that skinny boy trying to rub it in my face. Don't appreciate that. Look man, you want to talk about this back at my place? Ditch the white boy and come hang out with me tonight. I won't shoot up or nothing this time." He said this while stepping ever closer, smiling more broadly. He took another step. I saw in his right hand a dully gleaming piece of metal, a folded up switchblade. He smiled at me and I stepped back, shaking my head. His smile drained into a deep scowl. "I'm done asking. You're gonna come over to my place now and finish what we started," unfolding the knife and pointing it at me. This dude was 5'8" tops and skinny, and I'm 6'3", 200 pounds and regularly lift weights. Also, I had a 12-inch kitchen knife which I drew from my coat pocket and leveled at his throat. He looked at my knife, then back at his and smiled again. Bro, I was just playing. We can just talk here, bro, right? I don't..." "Leave my boyfriend alone, or I will cut your face and eat it." "Dude, what?" "I spent 8 years in juvie for stabbing a kid in middle school," I lied. He backed up, putting the knife back in his pocket. I took a step closer, pressing my advantage, holding my knife level. He backed away quickly, almost falling on the ice until he was full sprinting back to his place and I was chasing him down with my knife. Until he crossed the street, I stopped, slid the knife in my pocket and watched him run back to his building. Then I went back up to my bedroom, told my boyfriend that I just had to go pee, and fell asleep. So, nameless horny junkie, let's not meet, or I'll eat your face. 3 years ago, I tried Tinder for the first time. While most 25-year-old women have probably dabbled on Tinder or the like, I hadn't been single since I was 17. I met my ex while I was in high school, and 6 years later we got married, had a baby, and I was happy. But those last few years together, he had really began to resent me and the family we had created. I fought to keep our relationship together, but the abuse became more frequent and intense. It got to the point where I took the baby and fled the house in the middle of the night. My mind was scarred, my heart raw, and it was a very difficult time in my life. A few months after I'd left, I had a new home, a new job, and a renewed sense of life. I was starting to open up and could feel myself healing. I was, however, lonely. I was adjusting to shared custody and spent my weekends alone. I didn't want to jump into a relationship, but I did want to explore some of the things my 8-year relationship hadn't allowed me. Joining Tinder felt fun. It was new and scary, and after so much trauma, it felt nice to have so much positive attention. My self-worth was low, so the cheap compliments and instant gratification of the app felt incredible. Who am I to deserve their attention? Why would they choose to speak to me of all women? Not my healthiest coping mechanism, but I wanted to feel desirable. That's when I met Derek. He was an unassuming average guy. He was cute enough, but not so attractive that I felt self-conscious. Derek and I shared a few interests, craft beer, hiking, and he had a sense of humor that I liked. We agreed to meet up at a local restaurant. I was so nervous, my first date in 8 years. I donned my cutest dress, got made up and headed out. As I waited in the restaurant, my palms were sweaty, my heart was fluttering, and I began to question myself. He arrived and everything was awkward at first. We ordered our first beers and started to break the ice. As soon as the buzz of the alcohol began to hit, our conversation took off. We had relaxed in each other's company, and the rest of the date went smoothly. We joked about a karaoke across the street, and he laughed about how he didn't like karaoke. I am a huge fan, and while no superstar, I have spent a good amount of time in choir and can carry a tune well enough. One of my favourite rowdy weekend activities is going to that bar and bustling out some songs with the sweetest taste of gin on my tongue. I convinced him to go with me, and we left the restaurant and sang into the night, taking shots, flirting and laughing, and we ended the night in his truck, clumsy fumbling with each other's buttons and zippers, hearts racing with excitement. This had been what I needed. We texted back and forth more often, and soon we were talking about another date. I had enjoyed our time together, and liked that I didn't feel a deep connection with him. It was fun, and that was it. Because my heart wasn't tangled up in feelings, he felt safe. We decided for our second date that we would go tubing down a river that runs through our town. We had parked his orange truck at the end of the tubing run and took the tubes in my truck up the river. We agreed that he would zip up my truck key into his pockets on his short, and then he would drop me off at mine afterwards. Bright summer heat warmed our skin, and the water felt crisp and fresh on our toes. The afternoon slipped past as we floated down the river. When we reached the bottom, we deflated our tubes and headed back to my truck. Only, when Derek reached into his pocket, his face sank. He looked at me and said, "Your key is gone." I laughed. Surely he was joking. He insisted it wasn't a joke, and gravity pulled at my stomach, and I began to panic. This was the only copy of my truck key, and I had taken it on the river. I felt foolish and worried about how I would get a new key if we couldn't find it. The river was long. We had been tubing for hours. We stopped at several places to swim. He offered to drive me home and I accepted. During the drive, we made plans to meet up the next day and search for my keys at some of the stops we had made. We spent the next afternoon combing our swimming holes for my key. Up and down we swam, with very little hope that we would ever see the keys. We had to try though, and we kept at it. From one spot to another we drove, we swam and moved on. At the very last place we checked, as the light of the afternoon faded into a hazy orange, something caught his eye. Underwater near the shore were my keys. We were elated and could not believe our luck. To celebrate, we went back to his place for some drinks. He drove me down a long, wooded driveway, and at the very end was a shaded trailer. He told me that he was only renting a room from here from an elderly couple, but they were on vacation so we would be alone. We walked over the creaking porch and entered the trailer. Inside I could see the kitchen was a mess, not just a few dishes, but every surface was covered in mess. He ushered me away to show me his bedroom. It was small and not very clean either. Dirty clothes, mattress on the floor, a Rubbermaid bin with some snacks like Doritos and cheap beer. We did the deed and the yellow light of the trailer accentuated the stain on the walls. Afterwards, the spark of fun I had felt when we first met had withered, and I felt gross. I decided that would be our last date. A week passed, and we hardly texted. Our brief fling was ending, and I didn't expect to see him again. My mind moved on to other things. The weekend was coming, my friends were in town, and I was excited. We made plans to go to the karaoke together on Saturday night, and the day arrived, when I was surprised to see a text from Derek on my phone. "Hey, are you going to karaoke tonight?" I responded that I was, and he texted back that he would be there. I messaged him and said, "I thought you didn't like karaoke." He said that he had been invited by a girl he worked with and thought he'd give me a heads up that he would be with a date, in case I was there. I thanked him for taking the time to let me know, reassured him that I wouldn't be bothered at all, and said that I hoped he had a great date. Around 9:30 that night, my friends and I arrived at the bar. We got our drinks and picked a booth with a good view of the stage, and I had a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned my head, scanned the bar, and our eyes locked. Derek and his date were a few booths away, and he was watching us. He waved zealously with a big smile. His date turned around to look, and I managed an awkward wave. I was absolutely fine with him being on a date, but I didn't want to advertise that we knew each other or make his date uncomfortable. My friends were all aware of the time we had spent together, my thoughts on the experience, and the texts he had sent me earlier. We were all thinking it was a bit odd that he would go out of his way to interact with me in front of his date. But no harm, no foul. He was just being friendly, right? The evening carried on and we had a great time, basking in the atmosphere, drinking in the songs and laughter. A few hours in, we were sitting in our booth, when Derek stumbled over to our table with his date. He introduced her as Kat and plopped down beside me, pulling her down into the booth next to him. The strong smell of alcohol oozed off them, and I could see they were hammered. It became obvious they had both had too much to drink, their eyes glazed and words slurred. Kat seemed really nice despite her state, and she launched into a drunk story to the whole table. My friends and I were fairly uncomfortable and were unsure what was going on. Under the table, though, I felt Derek's sticky hands slide onto my thigh. His date was right there and I was stunned. Without making a scene, I subtly removed his hand and excused myself to get another drink. As I walked across the room, I could feel his eyes raking my back, and sure enough, when I turned around, he was watching. When I got back, Kat was slurring that her taxi had come. She and Derek exchanged a sloppy kiss and goodnights, and then it was just us and Derek. Derek's mood shifted after that. He was drunkenly unaware of how uncomfortable the table was, and we could tell he was brooding about his date having left without him. Derek turned his attention to me. He slung his heavy arm over my shoulder and leaned in, his sour breath managing to come together to form clumsy sentences. "You're so cute. I love your laugh." I was rigid and just wanted him to leave. When he got up to get another beer, my friends and I spoke about the situation, one of them remarking, "You know you can do better than this, right?" I agreed, and as casual as this had been, I had made a mistake. We came to the conclusion it would be best if we ended the night early, as we didn't see him leaving me alone. As a backup plan if anything went south, we agreed that the girls would go to the bathroom and leave out the back door while our male friend would distract him and slip away. Derek arrived at the table, sloshing his beer onto my front. He slurred, "Where we going next?" I hesitated, but my friend told him that we were all going home. Derek said he would walk us there, and we politely declined. He was leaning up against a wall and barely holding himself up at that point. We asked him how he was going to get home, and if we should call him a cab. Derek drunkenly pouted that he could just come to my place with me. Trying to shut him down as politely as possible, I told him that my child was there with the sitter, so I couldn't have him over. He didn't need to know that wasn't true. He refused a taxi and said he would just sleep in his truck, since his eyelids were drooping, and looking at the rest of his state, it seemed reasonable that he would be able to fall asleep in a truck. As we started to leave, he stumbled after us. We stopped and reminded him that we were going to bed. He argued against that and shouted to come with me. My friends and I locked eyes. It was time to engage with our backup plan. The two girls and I excused ourselves to the washroom while our friend distracted him. Slipping out the back door, the cool rush of air hit us, and we hurried to the path that led to their hotel. Our friend caught up with us and said he'd left Derek behind at the bar. We were all relieved to be out of there and started to walk back to their hotel. One of the girls was sober and offered to drive me home when I got to the hotel, and I accepted. A few minutes down the path, my phone began to ring. I looked at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. It was Derek. I turned the volume down and let it ring, and to my surprise, he left a voicemail. I turned on the speaker to play it out loud, and Derek's voice sounded confused as his words melted together in the phone. "Where are you guys? I thought we were gonna hang out. I don't understand." We were all glad we'd left, and agreed that it had been wild. That's when the phone rang again. Another voicemail popped into my screen. In the dim light of the trail, I played the new voicemail aloud once more. His drunken speech was more intense this time, as he launched into how he didn't understand why I had left. I had hurt his feelings, and he was in love with me. The tone of his voice shook me when I heard him say, "I love you." There was something dark and heavy about it that left me feeling unsettled. We were all creeped out, but happy to see the bright sign of the hotel ahead. We traveled the carpeted hallway to their room so my friend could grab their keys to take me, and as we entered the room, my phone began to ring again. This time, the voicemail sent shockwaves of fear through my body. Derek's voice had taken on an edge as he repeated that he loved me, but was actually really mad that I'd left him at the bar. He went on about how I could do that to him. He didn't know what he was going to do, and his voice shook with anger as he stumbled over himself, expressing how I had betrayed him. The last thing he said before hanging up echoed in the hotel room. "You know, I'm really starting to hate you." This guy was unhinged, and I was terrified. I was grateful this side of Derek hadn't shown up when we were alone in his secluded trailer. My friends gave me a hug and told me to call them if I needed anything and to keep them updated. My friend took me home as I unlocked the door and stepped into the comfort of home. I felt exhausted. It had not been the night out I expected, and Derek's erratic behavior had really freaked me out. Fresh out of an abusive relationship, his actions at the bar, then the voicemails, rang some all too familiar bells. That's when I saw the headlights. It was very late for anyone to be driving down my street. I peeked through the curtains and my blood ran cold. Sitting in the cab of his orange truck was Derek. Mind racing, I panicked. This dude could barely hold himself up when we left. He was blackout, obliterated. How did he drive across town to my house? How did he find me? I immediately remembered the other week when he dropped me off after my key was lost. How could I have been so stupid? I barely met him. Derek's face was stony and etched with rage as he sat in the dark cab staring at my house. He wasn't getting out. He was just staring. While I was on my hands and knees peeking out the window, all the lights were off inside. I wasn't sure if he could see me. Then the screen of my phone lit up. He was calling me again. I quickly hid it so he wouldn't see the light. Hands shaking, I played the voicemail as quietly as I could. Derek only said one thing at a time, a phrase that sent terror shooting down my spine. In a drunken sing-song voice, almost taunting me, he quietly said, "Where are you?" I was terrified. Somehow I hadn't really considered I would be in danger and chalked up all the fear to my past experiences. Surely I was overreacting, and it was my fault for reading too much into this. I shouldn't be scared, and I didn't want to make a scene. That last voicemail sealed the deal. I even figured if I was overreacting, at the very least he was a drunk driver, and I called 911 and the dispatcher said someone would be there in a few minutes. As I peeked out the window, I saw him exit his truck. He was done waiting. His heavy feet stumbled as they hit the pavement, and he looked around. Derek's voice cut through the night as he began yelling my name. The wild anger in his voice was tangible through the walls, and he just yelled into the street. Derek started to stumble towards my house when the flashing red and blue lights cascaded down the street, lighting up his face and highlighting every ounce of rage carved into his features. 2 police cars pulled up, and the officers got out. I was still peeking out from inside my house and couldn't hear much of what was happening. I watched them breathalyze him, which he obviously failed, and the officers inspected his truck. They all spoke for a while, and one of the officers came to my door. I spoke to him about what happened, and he was very empathetic. He said as unsettling as his actions had been, they couldn't do much because he hadn't given out a direct threat. The officer let me know that they would be taking him for the night and he would be charged with drunk driving, but that he would be out tomorrow, and to make sure I kept my doors locked and stayed safe. The tow truck came to remove his orange truck from the road, and I could see him arguing, but the officers weren't having any of it, and they turned around and cuffed him. As the handcuffs locked around his wrist, he yelled out one last time, looking directly at the window I was peeking out. "I know you're in there. Why don't you come out and say goodnight, Susan?" As quickly as my street had filled up, it was empty. The quiet shadows of the late night swallowing the earlier chaos into nothingness. Derek texted me the next afternoon. "I'm sorry about last night, I was in a bad place." I responded that his actions were unacceptable, and how dare he show up at my house where my child lives at, and that I would prefer to never hear from him again. He apologized one last time, and thankfully I haven't heard from him since. Over the next few months I would see him on a bike going to and from his workplace, so I know he lost his license. I was always wary that we would bump into each other, which thankfully never happened, and I can only imagine how much angrier he was after that night, as it cost him his license. I found out that he moved to the mainland a while back, which was quite a relief for me, and I no longer feel on edge around town. So Derek, let's never meet again. I once went on a Tinder date. I met the girl downtown. She looked like her pictures, and said that I did too, so it was a good start. I first asked her, since we had been walking for a while, if she would like to grab a drink. As soon as I muttered the word, she said no. I thought to myself, oh, maybe she just doesn't drink. So then I asked her if we should grab a coffee. This time she says, oh, I can't drink caffeine. Being frustrated, I said, well, there's more than coffee at Starbucks, and we stopped there, grabbed some non-caffeinated drinks, and began to talk. As the conversation developed, it clicked in my brain. No alcohol, no caffeine. She was pregnant. And without saying anything, 2 minutes later, she confessed that she was 8 weeks pregnant. She said that she just broke ties with the father 4 weeks ago, and I was already looking for the door. I was super polite the whole conversation, but then she started talking about us getting married one day. I literally met this girl an hour ago, and now she's telling me about our marriage? Every bell and whistle went off in my head, so I told her that it had been fun, but that it wasn't going to work out. She was sad, so I walked her out of the Starbucks. I then asked her if she needed a ride to her car, but to my surprise she started yelling and crying, saying I could have had it all. I remember walking away as fast as I could. As I heard her yelling in the background, I deleted and blocked her number and swore off Tinder forever. This story happened around a year ago, a few weeks after I broke up with my boyfriend of 2 years. I was on the receiving end of the breakup and was a complete mess. I was in college and living at home for the summer, in a very small town during the course of these events. A friend was consoling me and created my very first online dating profile for me, because gay men can sometimes think that more sex is the solution to everything. His intentions were good, and I have to admit that some of the men contacting me were very attractive. I didn't really know how to use the website very well, so I started to text a few of the guys I had met. This is when Robert comes into play. On the surface, well, below the neck, Rob was a 6'3" gorgeous man who had competed in bodybuilding competitions. Unfortunately, his face looked something akin to an axe murderer. His teeth were messed up, he wore glasses with those really thin metallic frames, and his hair looked like it had been cut by his mother. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. He seemed like a really nice guy. That first night that we texted, we probably stayed up until 2 a.m. talking about our lives. I heard a few things which aren't really red flags, but are usually turn-offs in what I look for a date. For a guy in his late 20s, Rob didn't have much of a career. He was a high school track assistant coach, and I wasn't really sure if he got paid for this job. The next morning, he wished me good morning and said that we should go on a date that day. I told him in detail how I was just broken up with and didn't really want to meet a guy for dinner and cry from the appetizer to the dessert. He understood and agreed, and then asked me out 3 hours later. This creeped me out, so I stopped talking to him. Rob began to call me several times a day. What made this stranger was the fact that it was every day at a few specific times, 10:17 a.m. and 9:17 p.m. every day. Sometimes he would call 3 times in a row, but always starting at 9:17 a.m. Obviously, I never picked up the phone. Considering I texted Rob for less than a 12-hour period, this began to frighten me. I mentioned this story as a joke to another one of my friends who was a police officer, but he took it more seriously than I expected. He told me that I should delete the profile, which I hadn't thought to do, and to be very careful. I deleted the profile right in front of him, and 30 seconds later, I got a text in all caps saying, "Why did you delete your profile?" I was startled. I can't say for sure, but it looked like he was continually monitoring my now abandoned profile on the website throughout the day. Getting more uneasy, my morning phone calls began to seriously worry me. Luckily, a week or so, and roughly 40 missed phone calls later, he seemed to finally get the message. I really wish that previous statement was correct. One morning my mum walked in with the day's mail. She handed me a large manila envelope with a handwritten address that appeared to be scribbled by a child. I thought it was a piece of artwork from one of the several children I babysat, so I opened it happily, and never have I been more wrong in my life. Out of the envelope came a 2-page long typed letter, a complete chat log of our conversation on the website, and a complete text log of our SMS conversation, and a full 8.5 by 11-inch copy of my profile photo taken from the website. I should also mention that I have absolutely no idea how he obtained my address. I also don't even know how you can make a text log without typing up the entire conversation itself. He must have copied my photo from the website long before that. I immediately began sobbing at the 20 pages of horror that fell out of the envelope. I will also admit that to this day, I have never read the typed letter. All I know is that it ended in a huge, creepy smiley face. My mum saw that I was crying, and I told her that I was being stalked. She asked me, "Who's doing this?" and I gave her Rob's full name. What happened next sent me completely over the edge. My mum began crying too, and told me that Rob had been emailing her, pretending to want to donate to her charity. My mum began to freak out as well, and when he began to ask about her children, and she stopped the email conversation. Now both of us crying, I called the local police department and told them that I was being stalked, and somehow a man had found my address and was also contacting my family members. A policeman was sent to our house, and he went through all of our documents and told us that although he had become angry, he wasn't threatening violence, and there was nothing the police could do. After staying until we had both calmed down and talking a few scenarios out, when we were walking the police officer to his patrol car, an unfamiliar car was parked across the street. It was Rob. I didn't get that spooked in that moment. The officer didn't realize who it was, but once Rob saw me standing with a cop, He probably got nervous, and thankfully, I never heard from him again. I was 19 and pretty naive, because I'd never done anything before with a guy or trusted people. His profile was blank on Grindr and said he was age 26 and average shape. He said he was handsome, and his phone glitched when he sent photos, so I believed him. We went to get pizza, and I stepped out of my car when this old man was waiting for me. He was definitely not 26, and he was around 300 pounds. Creeped out, but I thought I might as well enjoy the pizza, right, if he was paying. We got talking a bit, and he keeps telling me vulgar things, like how he can't have intercourse less than 3 times a day, and how dedicated I have to be to him, or else he wouldn't even consider dating me. Eventually he told me his real age was 45, and that he's a dental student. I asked him to take off his baseball cap, because I was curious if he had hair or not. What I saw was a huge horn. He said it's a very large cyst on the top of his head, and he shaves his head to avoid irritation or something. Imagine cartoon characters getting bonked on the head and having the large swollen lump afterwards. That is what I saw. After pizza, I acted like I had a decent time and would message him later. I would actually block him the second I got into my car, since I parked further away. He offered to take me via his car to mine. I said sure because I felt like he was harmless, although quite creepy. In his car, he asked if he could inspect my teeth since he's a dental student. I said no, but he strongly insisted and I said whatever. That's when he took out his belt of dentistry tools and unrolled it. He put on a headlamp and started picking at my teeth. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't like it. This guy was weird and didn't know proper etiquette. I told him my phone dropped on the side seat, so when I went to get it I left the car and drove off in my own. So this guy who's around my age messaged me on Grindr. He seemed nice enough, and after a decent conversation I give him my number. I learned that he's new to town and has made friends with a few people that I know since him moving to my city. After a day or two he asks if we can hang out, and I'm usually not down to meet up with anyone off Grindr, but since we had some mutual friends I decided to try it. I'm coming from my sister's cookout, and I head downtown to his place. We agreed to just drive around and talk a little bit, so I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable with that. As we're driving, he throws out strange comments like, if we ever work out, and others. It's almost like he's trying to make it official after the first meetup, so I tell him I'm not looking for a relationship, just friendship, and that he was a really cool guy. We get back to his place, and we're sitting in his car that's turned off trying to make small talk, and he proceeds to talk to me about how he had herpes, not the kind you see on your face. At this point, a little dumbfounded, mostly because I don't know how to respond to that, he offers to go up to his room and just hang out and watch a movie. Mind you, it's like 3 AM. I said sure. We went upstairs, sat for 10 minutes, and as he was turning on the movie, he takes his pants off, and I told him I was just gonna go, and that we should hang out again soon. But I've never seen him again since, and every now and then he pops up on my social media feed because of our mutual friends. Good evening all and welcome, thank you so much for listening. This is the first video of a week-long marathon of videos, so come back tomorrow for even more scary stories. And let me know what you thought down below. I'd like to extend a huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names you can see on screen. For signing up to either one, you get a bunch of cool perks and lots of bonus content, so check it out if you feel so inclined. But for now, more links on screen. Till next time, stay awesome.